Okay. A very warm welcome to everyone joining us today from different time zones across the world. Today's webinar, Decoding Climate Tech Solutions for Emerging Market Financial Sectors, is a joint initiative by Optus ESG, the Association of Development Financing Institutions in Asia and the Pacific, ADFIAP, the Association of Development Finance Institutions in Malaysia, ADFIM, and the Coalition of Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, CDRI. The webinar aims to delve into climate transition and the role of technology as an enabler of low carbon transition within financial institutions. To begin with, a quick introduction of the organizers of today's webinar. ADFIAP is the focal point of 90 development banks and other financial institutions in 40 countries and territories in the Asia Pacific region, and it aims to scale sustainable development through its members. ADFIM is a unique combination of development financial institutions and entrepreneur development organizations. With a membership base of 17 institutions, ADFIM aims to promote synergy and collaboration in the development finance and banking industry in Malaysia. Optus ESG is a global company providing strategic advisory and enablement on sustainable finance, climate transition, ESG, and climate risk management to the banking and financial sector. The organization stands at the intersection of finance, investments, and sustainability and has been awarded marquee projects by governments, multilaterals, and financial institutions. CDRI is a partnership of national governments, UN agencies and programs, multilateral development banks and financing mechanisms, the private sector, and knowledge institutions that aim to promote the resilience of new and existing infrastructure systems into climate and disaster risks in support of sustainable development. Now I will quickly go over the plan for today's session. We will begin with the welcome address by Mr. Enrique Florencio, followed by a special address by Mr. Prasad Hanif. Following this, Ms. Namita Vikas will set the tone and context for today's discussion. This will be followed by the keynote address by Mr. Edwin and the presentation of Global Infrastructure Resilience Index by Dr. Raj Shekhar from CDRI. The event will then transition into a dynamic panel discussion and conclude with an interactive Q&A session. Now, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our esteemed speakers joining us today. For the welcome address, we have Mr. Enrique Florencio, the Secretary General of ADFIAP. He has been an active technical member of Sustainability Strategic Consulting for more than a decade. I would like to invite Mr. Florencio to deliver his welcome address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Te. To our esteemed guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our webinar on Decoding Climate Tech Solutions for Emerging Markets Financial Sectors. In light of recent events and the evolving landscape of climate change, exploring innovative solutions at the intersection of technology and sustainability is more critical than ever. As we gather here today, the urgency of addressing climate challenges is underscored by recent extreme weather events, rising sea levels, and the pressing need for concerted global action. In the context of Asia and the Pacific, a region highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, we are witnessing a growing momentum toward sustainable practices and green initiatives. Countries such as China, India, and Southeast Asian nations are increasingly embracing renewable energy, clean technologies, and climate-resilient infrastructure to mitigate environmental risks and drive economic growth. Asian businesses also recognize the imperative of integrating sustainability into their operations and investment strategies. From renewable energy projects in Vietnam to sustainable finance initiatives in Singapore, we are witnessing innovative business cases demonstrating the potential for climate tech solutions to transform industries and drive positive impact. For instance, the rise of green bonds and ESG investing in Asia is reshaping the financial landscape, with institutions leveraging these instruments to fund projects that support environmental conservation and climate adaptation. Companies in the region are also adopting innovative technologies such as AI, Internet of Things, and blockchain to optimize resource efficiency, reduce carbon footprints, and enhance supply chain transparency. In today's session, we will delve into these current events and business cases in Asia, examining how financial institutions can harness climate tech solutions to drive sustainable development, foster resilience, and unlock new growth opportunities. Our esteemed speakers and panelists will share their insights, experiences, and best practices, offering valuable perspectives on the transformative power of technology in addressing climate challenges in emerging markets. I encourage all of you to actively engage in our discussions, share your perspectives, and explore the possibilities that lie at the nexus of climate, technology, and finance. Together, let us decode the potential of climate tech solutions to shape a more sustainable future for Asia and beyond. Thank you for joining us, and let us embark on this enlightening journey together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Florencio. Next, I would like to introduce Mr. Prasad Hanif, Secretary General of ADFIM, an author, trainer, and coach who specializes in leadership and business transformation and has been accredited as being among the top speakers in Malaysia. Sir, I would invite you to give your special address.
Thank you very much, Ritu, on that introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good day to all. Assalamu alaikum. It is definitely an honor to speak at this significant event. And I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks and appreciation to Mr. Enrique Florencio, Secretary General of ADFIAP, and Namita Vikas, Founder and Managing Partner of Octus ESG, for their exceptional leadership and vision. Their dedication and commitment has been a big drive and inspiration for ADFIM as well. A big thank you also goes to the teams from ADFIAP, Octus ESG, and ADFIM who have worked tirelessly to make this webinar possible. And this webinar did not happen overnight. It took weeks for them to coordinate and to ensure that it is a success. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we are at a pivotal moment in history. Climate change is no longer a distant threat, but a pressing reality. Emerging markets like ours are particularly vulnerable, but they also hold immense potential for innovative solutions. Now, according to the IMF, the global transition to a local carbon economy could unlock up till $10 trillion in new business opportunities by 2030. The World Bank reports that investing in green technologies can create over 65 million new jobs worldwide by 2030. These statistics show the immense potential of climate tech solutions. However, ladies and gentlemen, we must act swiftly. The World Economic Forum highlights that every dollar invested in climate resilience today can save $6 in future disaster recovery costs. This is a wonderful argument and a powerful argument for immediate and substantial investments in climate technology and to drive across the seriousness of the issue. Emerging markets need robust financial solutions to support this transition. And I would like to emphasize the word transition because development finance institutions, DFIs, play a crucial role in mobilizing capital for green projects. They can bridge the financing gap and de-risk investments in climate tech. Collaboration, therefore, is very key. We need partnerships between government, the private sector, the commercial banking sector as well, and international organizations. By working together, I believe, we can create an ecosystem that supports innovation and sustainability. Hence, we have these webinars that we organize cross-border, cross-time zones. And I would like to invite everyone that are delegates today to not just listen to what the panelists have to say or the experts have to say, but I would like to invite all the delegates to network with each other in the chat room, and so that we can actually learn from each other and we can take it to the next level in our own institutions. Now, in conclusion, the future of our planet depends on the actions we take today. So let us seize this opportunity to lead the way in climate tech solutions. Together, I believe we can build a resilient and sustainable future for all. Now, once again, thank you to Mr. Enrique Florencio, Ms. Namita Vikas, and the entire teams from ADFIAP, Octus ESG, and ADFIM for their dedication and hard work. Thank you, and hopefully you have a fruitful workshop ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would also like to add that the webinar is registered under the London Climate Action Week, and it's under its aegis that this webinar is conducted. I would now invite Ms. Namita Vikas to set the context for today's panel discussion. Namita is the founder and managing director of Optus ESG. She is an award-winning senior business leader with over 3 decades of diverse global experience in sustainable finance, ESG, and climate strategy across banking and technology. At Optus ESG, Namita has led impactful projects across emerging markets, receiving accolades from governments, UN agencies, and global DFIs. Namita would also be moderating the panel discussion today. Over to you, Namita.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ritu, and thank you, Enrique and Prasad, for your remarks and the participation and this joint partnership that we have been doing for over 3 years now. I extend a very warm welcome to all the speakers, the global audiences that have joined us from different time zones, and of course, a very special welcome to Mr. Edwin Kokek, who is the head of the EU Green Inclusive Development and who's in Bangladesh currently. And Edwin is an expert on EU legislative procedures and climate negotiations. And in the past, he has been a part of the European Parliament cabinet and advised its president. I would also like to welcome Hara, Carl, Zakia, and Mark, who are going to be the panelists today, and their introductions will come in shortly. I think this is a very important topic that we have taken up today of climate impacts and the role of technology to accelerate risk mitigation and opportunities within financial institutions. You would agree, and as the other speakers highlighted, that 2023 and 2024, these years have been strife with extreme weather events. The cost of climate inaction is adversely impacting human, social, natural, and financial capital. Decarbonizing of economies has become an urgent and a global priority, with agendas advocating for rapid systemic and institutional change. Simultaneously, the demand on capital providers and financial institutions is escalating the need to analyze physical and transition risks. As the nature of climate risk is very transverse, and they're fast translating into financial and credit risks. Now, looking at all this, I think the response has come from technology. Innovative software and hardware technologies are emerging towards decarbonizing energy, e-mobility, heavy industry. Climate tech, the new term on the block, is targeted towards reducing GHG emissions or addressing the impact of global warming. And the accelerated focus on decarbonization and towards building fossil fuel alternatives like renewable energy efficiency solutions, green hydrogen, or CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. All this is demanding technologies or hard tech solutions that can deliver at speed, responses like smart metering, carbon accounting, AI-led training of carbon credits, or machine learning, or the use of SaaS-based services. And all these are emerging as responses to the need that has come up from a physical or a transition risk assessment standpoint. And evidently, there is a growing market for investments in climate tech, with several market reports indicating that a growth rate of 25% is happening within the space. But despite this, the financing gap of about $2 trillion remain. For example, the IEA estimated that 35% of the targeted emission reductions by 2050 are expected to be facilitated through technologies under development, which are yet to go to commercial scale. And then on the other side, capital-intensive hard tech solutions particularly face this challenge of attaining scalability, as capital providers often lack, one, the understanding of sectoral risks or the expertise to invest in unproven technologies. And in certain cases, the perceived risk may not be too unfounded. A study that I was going through, this is done by IFA, found that CCUS projects often fail to meet their stated targets, and 10 out of 13 prominent projects that were studied failed to perform or significantly underdelivered by wide margins. And this is raising concerns around the viability or the bankability of such solutions. On the other side, factors such as changes in the geopolitical landscape, soaring interest rates, devaluations, all this has also discouraged financiers, especially private financiers, who have the potential to bring in large scale capital. However, I think one cannot deny the critical role of these technologies in net zero transition, and builds a case for financing the missing middle for the climate tech. I think alongside the hard tech, the software also plays a very critical role in designing effective instruments for assessing and managing climate related risks when integrating with physical assets. Estimates have suggested that digital technologies could help reduce the world's carbon emissions by about 17%. And in case of financial institutions, it is very vital to adopt and invest in these solutions that aid integration of climate related considerations in decision making. And that's not easy. I mean, as a banker, I can tell you, but there are benefits of tech applications, and this would look at, so we've seen in the past how for certain sectors, when tech applications have been applied, assessing the exposure of climate risks across time horizons and identifying vulnerable sectors. The tough part is analyzing the physical risks, where the accuracy and the availability of data is a huge gap. Also, skill sets as far as credited risk officers is concerned. Especially in case of physical risk, the granular data is missing, and heavy reliance on third-party data providers also lead to significant inconsistencies in the quality and the granularity. Then on the other side, I think tech enables measuring the degree of alignment of portfolios with national and international transition agendas. Prasad mentioned, he emphasized on the fact that transition is important, and therefore tech to be utilized for this purpose becomes very, very critical. And then also designing strategies to drive the net zero. I think the time today is for different players in the financial sector and the tech sector to come together to bring about innovative solutions to de-risk investments and to increase the financial flows that we are looking at. Having said that, there are solutions. For example, in 2022, the finance minister and the central bank governors endorsed the work plan of the third phase of the G20 data gap initiative, with recommendations addressing 4 areas, including climate change. The MFI has developed a climate change dashboard, which includes, again, 6 indicators, including GHG emissions, mitigation, adaptation, transition to low carbon economy, climate finance, and climate and weather related aspects. It is aimed at demonstrating the impact of economic activities on climate change, along with ongoing measures to manage these impacts and inform decision making. CDRI has come up with a brilliant tool, which I'm sure Mahesh is going to speak about in a bit. So all of this is pointing towards a direction that collaboration is important. Financial institutions need to take a kind of a two-fold approach of channelizing capital flows to climate tech, help develop these hardware, software solutions, at the same time embed these within their own decision making. And the whole idea of this webinar is to talk about the viable solutions, what's available in the market, also from a banker's perspective, what could be the challenges. So looking forward to a very exciting panel discussion shortly, but over to you, Ritu. I'll stop here and hand it over back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Namita. I'm sure we will have great takeaways from today's session. I would like to warmly welcome today's keynote speaker now, Mr. Edwin Kicker. Mr. Kicker is the team leader of the Green Inclusive Development Section, first counselor at the delegation of the European Union to Bangladesh. Previously, he held the position of first counselor on energy and climate action at the EU delegation to India, focusing on strengthening EU-India cooperation under the 2016 Clean Energy and Climate Partnership. He started his career working for 7 years at the Netherlands Ministry of Environment, including roles in climate negotiations and air quality policy, after which he worked for 11 years for the European Parliament Secretariat. Based on his work in the Environment Committee and his expertise in the areas of environment, climate change, renewable energy, and EU legislative procedures, he advised the President of European Parliament for 2.5 years as a member of his cabinet. Welcome, sir. I invite you to deliver the keynote address.
Thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to meet all of you. It's always a pleasure to meet Mrs. Namita Vikas. A pleasure to meet the two Secretary Generals, and also when I was in India for 5 years, I really enjoyed working with also the CDRI. I think a very important international institution. So thank you for having me in this prestigious webinar. I will focus on the European perspective and on our work in Bangladesh. So our EU policies, both our internal EU policies and our external EU policies, are guided by the European Green Deal and by the EU climate law, which makes our commitment legally binding to deliver at least minus 55% greenhouse gas emissions reductions by 2030, and Europe wants to be the first climate neutral continent by 2050. So the European Green Deal, and I think Mrs. Namita Vikas and the two Secretary Generals already spoke about it, considers sustainability as an economic growth model. It offers opportunities, and it ensures higher competitiveness from Europe. The European Green Deal focuses on keeping the 1.5 degrees alive. It focuses on the Sustainable Development Goals, on affordable, secure and clean energy, and also very important, on a diversified supply chain. And keeping this 1.5 degrees alive is important because every 10th of a degree counts, even more so in the country where I'm working now, in Bangladesh, which is the 7th most vulnerable country in the world. The longer we wait with deep emission cuts, the higher the risks, the higher the damage. So COP28 included an agreement by all parties to transition away from fossil fuels, to triple renewable energy and double the rate of energy efficiency by 2030. It operationalized the loss and damage funds, and it was also an important opportunity to discuss carbon pricing so that more countries start to put a price on pollution. Financing will also be at the top of COP29. In this context, allow me to spell out that in 2022, the EU and its member states contributed 28.5 billion to international public climate finance, with more than half addressing climate adaptation or cross-cutting issues involving both adaptation and mitigation to climate change. The EU also mobilized an additional amount of 12 billion of private finance, contributing significantly to the USD 100 billion goal. As has also been said, the financial needs for the climate transition run into the trillions, and public finance alone cannot come up with those trillions. We need to mobilize private finance and show private investors that it pays off to invest in climate tech solutions. As EU, through the so-called Global Gateway Strategy, we plan to mobilize globally up to 300 billion euros between 2021 and 2027 to invest in the digital sector, climate and energy sector, transport, health, and also education and research. And we plan to do this across the world. In Bangladesh, the EU has significantly increased its cooperation in the area of the green energy transition. Under a Team Europe initiative, we focus here on energy efficiency, renewable energy, smart grid integration and storage, the enabling regulatory and policy framework, and we also focus on increasing regional energy connectivity. The Team Europe initiative, so this is the EU and the EU member states and the EU financial institutions, including KfW, AFD and of course the European Investment Bank, together through an overall portfolio of 1.3 billion euro, invest in energy relevant projects in Bangladesh, including grants and soft loan. The Global Gateway flagship, called the Bangladesh Renewable Energy Facility, is one of the key elements, and it was signed at the first Global Gateway Forum in October 2023 in Brussels, in the presence of the Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh. It entails a 350 million euros EU guaranteed European Investment Bank loan with a 45 million euros grant, providing for investments in public utility-scale solar, wind, and storage projects, focusing on solar and wind. The 45 million grant includes a 6 million technical assistance facility, which need to ensure that the projects are bankable and that they comply with the international market practices, as well as the European Investment Bank's environmental and social standards. The 390 million of investment grants bring in concessional lending tools. In addition, and this is the last thing I want to refer to, the EU, together with the EIB, is developing the Global Green Bond Initiative, which will facilitate the flow of private capital from institutional investors into climate and environmental projects in EU partner countries such as Bangladesh, thereby increasing their access to capital. It will provide technical assistance to green bond issuers in emerging markets and developing economies, and by crowding in private investors through a dedicated de-risked fund. In this regard, an environmental and social management framework has been prepared and can now be consulted online, and I will share the link with Octus ESG so that it can be shared also with all the participants. So green bonds will offer the government long-term financing, in particular for climate resilient infrastructure, and can potentially reduce the cost of debt finance. The EU is closely working with other actors in Bangladesh, such as UNDP and IFC, who have their own activities in the field of sustainable finance, including green bonds. To conclude, working on green renewable projects, on climate tech solutions, and on developing domestic bond markets in countries like Bangladesh, focusing on de-risking investments is of key importance. It will involve initial foreign investments, thus giving more confidence to additional large foreign institutional investors and other domestic and foreign investors. Thank you very much, and I'm really looking forward to the remaining presentations and the panel discussion. Thank you very much for having me. Over to you, Rita.
Thank you, sir, for the insightful remarks. Finally, I would like to call upon Dr. Uma Maheshwaran Rajshekhar from CDRI. He's a disaster risk and climate resilience expert with over decades of experience developing plans, policies, programs, and knowledge products, including digital tools and training programs for mainstreaming governments, INGOs, and multilateral agencies' efforts towards building urban resilience. Dr. Rajshekhar will be presenting the pioneering tool, Global Infrastructure Resilience Index, or GIRI, as it is called today. Sir, over to you, please.
Thank you, Ritu, for the introduction, and thank you, First Counselor, for setting the context through your keynotes address and also indicating the range of investments which are going through it, and also the Secretary Generals for them addressing the need of the day, and also Ms. Namita Vikas for setting the context in this particular event. It's great for us to partner and also to present on this particular event on two main fronts. One is that while there is a lot of investment getting into infrastructure, new tech, and also the kind of investments which country governments are doing to improve the quality of service and also the safeguarding life and livelihood of people, it's important for us to look at climate change from two additional perspectives. One, whatever we are investing today, basically those investments should be safeguarded against the future extremes. So it's very important that what we do invest is also resilient against these future extremes, but also importantly, it should also ensure that it enhances the livelihood of people and also provides additional benefit more than what it is initially structured or designed for. The second main aspect of it is the adaptation finance. While there is a considerable amount of awareness which exists in terms of mitigation financing, emission reduction, and so on and so forth, it's also equally important for one to consider the adaptation finance. But these are complex systems. We are working with something which we don't know. We have certain models to predict or project what the climate change events are going to bring about in the next 2 decades. But what we are experienced in the last 2 decades is something which we have never foreseen. Or every time a climate disaster takes place, it becomes very difficult for people to come back to normalcy. Country governments have been affected, and it's important for people to understand what they are likely to face, what they are facing currently, and what they are likely to face to take informed decision. For that, I'm just going to take you through one of the tools which have been developed by CDRI. It's called the Global Infrastructure Risk Model and Resilience Index. It's an open source data platform for people to visualize and see the extent of risk which their assets are experiencing currently, and also what they are likely to face in event of climate change. It includes risks which are geophysical, that is earthquake and tsunami and earthquake-induced landslide, but it also provides information on hydrometeorological risk, which includes tropical cyclone floods, flood-induced landslides and storm surges. And over and above this, these hydrometeorological risks are also informed by climate extremes. That is the scenarios which are provided by IPCC, the 2.6 scenario and also the 8.5 scenarios. So what we have done is we have looked at 8 critical infrastructure types and how these infrastructures are likely to be impacted by these natural events. Using a very simple probabilistic model, simple in terms of easy to understand, it provides a very clear indication of the extent of dollar amount which will be lost in event of a particular hazard. And it is projected in terms of the annual average loss or loss exceedance curve or probable maximum loss. While these are figures which are widely used by insurance companies to come up with a premium, it also, we feel that it is going to inform country governments and also financial institutions whenever they go about investing in a particular asset or in a particular infrastructure. This additionality which they need to consider for making sure that the design are informed by the risk which those infrastructures are likely to face in the coming decade. If there is an $100 investment which is getting into it, if the annual average loss is close to say $2 per year, so probably over the next 10 to 20 years, that particular investment is likely to lose $40. So therefore it may be useful to consider investing a much an additionality of $1 or less than $1 to look at the risk from a design perspective and also from an implementation perspective, so that the asset is safeguarded and also the implementation becomes much more easier. This is presented in a very easy to use tool, and for all people, it is an open source data platform. So anybody can get into Giri, view the data, download the data, and use the data as they deem best. So it has the hazard risk information, which are maps, so one can zoom into various country levels and look at the flood risk, look at the landslide risk, earthquake, and so on and so forth. It also has information at various scales, so one can zoom in and zoom out to get a better understanding of the region or the area of their particular interest. In addition to the maps, there is also data and information which country government and especially if there is an economics department or finance department which wants to allocate certain risk financing measures, or they have to come up with the disaster risk financing mechanisms. What is the amount which is to be allocated for a particular sector? Say, for example, a power sector. Even though it is highly privatized, how much the private companies should keep aside for these eventualities, so that whenever an event takes place, at least they have the minimum resource to do a quick fix and help them at least maintain and get those critical infrastructure back online so that people and services continue to be provided. Especially when a disaster takes place, people are most in need of hospitals. But if the hospitals don't function, then it becomes a huge challenge, and there is a possibility of increased life loss. Similarly, whenever during the recovery and response phase, electricity becomes quite important. Telecommunication services becomes quite important. But if these services do not function post a disaster in an immediate aftermath, then the extent of loss becomes quite high. And in order to come up with this, this tool also provides those annual average loss which country governments are likely to experience, sectors are likely to experience, so that the investments can be made appropriately. In addition to that, it also projects and provides information around climate extremes, like I talked about. What is the future change likely to bring? So that whatever infrastructure which are currently being designed, invested around, also takes into consideration the future losses, so that additionality to safeguard these systems against future extremes are included in the early stages of design, planning, and investments. It provides 8 different sectors, but within each of these sectors, it also gives a much more detailed insight. Like, for example, if you look at to the energy sector, it provides various classification, that what is the likely annual average loss for oil and natural gas, for new and renewable energy, for power transmission, power distribution, so on and so forth. Similarly, for transport, it is further bifurcated into airports, seaports, and also the roadways and railways. It's quite a rich amount of information for people to play around with. Of course, these tools are being designed to help policymakers, to help decision makers, to help investors, and also to help these financial institutions to look in terms of what is the extent of exposure they have towards their assets, or what is the kind of loss which they are likely to face, and based on which they can take informed decisions for better design, or some fiscal risk planning, or for insurance mechanisms, so on and so forth. So thank you very much once again. And this data is currently provided through the platform. So people who are interested in it can use the QR code or type GIRI CDRI in Google, and they may hit upon it in the first couple of links. And we also do provide, additional going through this platform. If any of you attendees do have queries, suggestions, inputs, and also feedback, do provide it to us. We'll be glad to improve this platform. So this is the first of its kind, which is there, openly available for people to use, and we hope to keep constantly improving it over time. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ritu.
Thank you, sir, for that wonderful presentation. I know everyone is eager to tune into the panel discussion, so I will quickly introduce the panelists. To begin with, we have Ms. Zakia Matessa, who serves as the Chief Sustainability Officer at SME Bank Malaysia, a wholly owned DFI under the Ministry of Finance and an agency under the Ministry of Entrepreneur and Cooperatives Development. Her rich experience of more than 2 decades in financial institutions spanned retail, commercial, and investment banking. She has successfully charted SME Bank's sustainability journey, where its sustainability sukuk issuance garnered various accolades. Welcome, Ms. Zakia. Next, Dr. Carl Malin is the co-founder and director of Science and Technology at XDI, or Cross Dependency Initiative, which is a part of the Climate Risk Group. Dr. Carl is the co-founder, as I just mentioned, of XDI. With a background in both physics and mechanical engineering, Carl has worked in climate change mitigation, policy, and technological analysis since 1991 and has specialization in climate adaptation since 2005. His team's pioneering work in developing technology to quantify the cost of extreme weather to the built environment led to the development of the climate risk engines in 2012. Carl is an editor and co-author of Renewable Energy Policy and Politics, a handbook for decision making, published by EarthScan, and a contributing author for Practical Adaptation Studies, published by Wiley. Carl is also a founding board member of the Climate Bonds Initiative. Welcome, Dr. Malin. Now, Ms. Hara is the Senior Principal of Revenue Optimization and Partnerships at Obify. Hara is the co-founder of Obify. She is an author, an engineer, an educator, and a technologist. Over the last 20 years, she has always been at the intersection of technology and how it acts to innovate and transform the world. Her focus now is how to tactically deal with climate impacts via physics AI-based digital twins to translate climate risks to climate forces for buildings, structures, and homes, helping banks, insurers, regulators make better decisions and help all with respect to climate resilient infrastructure. Welcome, Ms. Brad. Finally, we have Mr. Magu, CEO of Capitals Coalition. Mr. Go is the Chief Executive Officer of the Capitals Coalition. He has worked extensively in the private sector, leading programs and strategy for the Crown State and Reed Elsevier, as well as advising many more. Mr. Mark holds various board and advisory positions, including the steering committee for the Global Commons Alliance and the board for the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity. Previously, Mr. Mark led the National Capital Coalition and was on the board of the Social and Human Capital Coalition. He championed and delivered the bringing together of these two communities, creating a unified, systemic, collaborative approach. Welcome, Mr. Go. A few quick announcements before we start the panel discussion. We have an exciting lineup of speakers, and I would request each speaker to observe the prescribed speaking time. I would request the participants to key in your questions in the Q&A box on the screen, and the moderator would take them up suitably. In addition to Zoom, this event is being live streamed on AdFin's LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook pages. We have about 40 minutes of the panel discussion. We will now jump into the panel discussion. Namita, may I please request you to moderate a discussion? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And yes, I'm really excited. It's a very good blend of banking and tech sectors, brought together to look at, what is the role and the way forward from a climate tech for financial institutions. So essentially, there will be two rounds of questions, and I would request each one of you to answer. I'll take the first question with Zakia. So Zakia, financial institutions indeed need to rapidly integrate climate considerations into their risk management and credit approval processes. So, but it's not that simple. And, financial institutions are like, it's like making the elephant dance, right? So what are some of the key challenges and the limitations that banks face in accessing, integrating, or deriving actionable insights from climate data using technology? Because I think it's fast moving towards usage of technology. And since, the focus of your bank is particularly on the supply chain, the SME sector, the small and medium scale sector, how would that impact the financing of climate-oriented SMEs? Over to you, Zakia.
Thank you, Ms. Namita. Thank you, Ms. Ritu, for the kind introduction, and thank you for having me here. Good afternoon, everyone. It's now 3:13 p.m. Malaysia time, and the weather is good and the sun is shining brightly. Okay, before I answer your question, Namita, allow me to share a little bit background of SME Bank. Okay, as mentioned by the MC, SME Bank is one of the 6 DFI in Malaysia, and we are fully owned by the Ministry of Finance, supervised by the Ministry of Entrepreneur Development and Cooperatives, and regulated by the Central Bank of Malaysia. Being a DFI, our mandate is to provide financing and advisory services to SMEs involved in manufacturing, services, and construction sectors. Now, talking about climate data, we can't deny its importance, and without this data, how could we possibly track, measure, report, and derive actionable insights? In Malaysia, there is a policy document titled Climate Risk Management and Scenario Analysis, issued by the Central Bank in 2022. This policy mandates all financial institutions, in short we call it FIs, to make annual climate disclosures that align with the recommendations of the Financial Stability Board's Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, in short we call it TCFD. All FIs are required to publish this disclosure together with annual financial reports for financial years beginning on or after 1st Jan 2034. Subsequently, there is another policy document issued also by the Central Bank of Malaysia in February this year titled Climate Risk Stress Testing, whereby one of the main requirements is related to, again, climate data. Based on the above two policy documents, we can see that access to climate data adequately and timely is very important. And the climate data should be of certain quality. It should be adequate, reliable, measurable, and comparable. With that, to answer your question, Namita, in general, the challenges and limitations that the banks are facing, other than scarcity of talent, can be summarized into 3 key points. The first one is the availability and quality of data. At present, access to comprehensive, real-time, and reliable climate data is very limited. But thank you to Dr. Umar. It has a very interesting platform that we can play with. We can explore that later. But case in point in Malaysia is, for example, floods. How do we accurately perform stress testing on floods-related risk without the required data? For example, in SME Bank, we have the address of the customers, the business premises, and the properties that pledge to us as collaterals. However, the challenge is how to map this data with floods data pool and derive actionable insights to mitigate this climate-related risk. We need the right technology to facilitate this requirement. Number 2 is regulatory and reporting challenges. Regulatory requirements for climate disclosure are still evolving. However, we need to have a standardized disclosure format so that it is consistent, comparable, and meaningful to the readers. And the third one is technology integration. We're talking about fintech now. There are challenges in integrating climate data from one source to another when the data format is not standardized. Moreover, it may also involve significant upfront CAPEX requirement, which requires thorough assessment and proper justification. These limitations somehow may affect the climate-oriented SMEs in the sense that without enough reliable and quantifiable climate data, the banks are unable to assess and properly address the climate-related risks, hence unable to provide proper financing package. As a result, limiting SMEs access to proper green and transition financing to support their decarbonization plan. Namita, it seems like this is our problem statement that the banks, from the bank's perspective, and I believe our 3 other panelists would have some impactful solution to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zaki. I think that was very, very important. I think while we talk about data and standards, I think one of the important aspects that you brought out was data integration, because there are existing systems, and how do you, first of all, even banks have the budgets to be able to do that, and let alone SMEs to do that. And that creates a very good segue into moving on to Carl. So Carl, hi, I would like to bring you in here now. XDI and climate evaluation leverage climate modeling and geographical features to assess the exposure and the vulnerability of particular real estate properties to extreme weather-related hazards. So I would like you to throw some more light on how this risk is translated into climate-adjusted values, and how does that really work? If you could just talk a little more about that. Thank you. Over to you, Carl.
Yeah, thank you, Namita. And just look, I'd like to thank you for the invitation, and Enrique for sponsorship of the event. It's really great to be invited. Look, I think Zakia's points about the challenges for the bank are really well made and a great way to pick up. In a way, the challenge I think Zaki is throwing down is, if we look at this sort of very big picture work that, for example, CDRI is doing, which is looking at this sort of big scale of infrastructure and so on, when we look at an institution that is lending, say, commercial finance, it's happening at the property level, or even a mortgage. That someone wants to buy a house, they come through the door. How does someone like Zaki make a decision, which is to say, is this okay? Now banks are in a very in my view, one of the highest risk institutions, because when they're lending, they're doing that over quite long periods, 10, 10 years for, say, commercial, and then up to 30 years for residential. So they're taking a long, essentially, they're taking a quite a long exposure to these risks. And of course, 30 years in the era of climate change is a lot. So what we've really been trying to do at XDI is find solutions that connect the flood data. So, for example, high resolution flood data across, Malaysia, but ASEAN, and then we have global data. Now, again, as Zaki points out, this data is quite hard to get. It's actually very, very expensive. So it's much easier for an aggregator like XDI to say, well, we'll take that and then we'll distribute the cost. And then also things like satellite data on forests, information on landslip, coastal inundation data and elevations. This requires lots and lots of information. Some of it's weather data, some of it's land data, some of it's climate change data. And then the trick really is to get it into a form that it is able to inform a specific decision. And then, Namita, I think you're right. These things are what we're seeing now is the point you're saying is, well, how's it going to affect value? Obviously, if you've got a lending institution, they want to make sure that this thing's worth some money in case something goes wrong or that they've got their right loan to value ratio correct. So really, they're wanting to see, is this property going to be insurable? You don't want to have a flood in it not insured. Is the property going to hold its value? Are there going to be financial strains on the borrower, for example, from insurance that would make it very difficult for them to repay the loan? So these are all considerations, very, very practical. Banks ask these questions all the time. So what we've got to do is get climate data so that we can inform the standard questions they ask. So the kind of work that is available, and I'll sort of illustrate this. I think that there are three cohorts we need to look at here. We've discussed the banks, but they sit in between the regulators and the customers, and really we need all three having access to the same information. So on a XDI, yes, our commercial work is with banks, and we work with lots of large banks around the world, including in Europe and in Asia. But then the other one is the regulators, because to some extent they can only regulate the bank well if they have access to the same information. And again, I want to pick up Zaki's point here was about comparability, consistency. And a lot of the regulators have been quite frustrated, which is that they see lots of different types of physical risk reports using different models and using different assumptions. So again, we need to get that information to regulators. So we've been working, indeed, we met with the Malaysian regulator just a couple of days ago, but with regulators in Canada, in Singapore. We're working with the HKMA in Hong Kong, mainly, and this is interesting because some of these projects are actually non-commercial. They're actually just, we provide free data to regulators. And if there's anyone on the call who's in that position, please reach out. Mainly because we think it's important that the policeman has access to the best data and is not sitting there being, if you like, what would you call, potentially, not necessarily misled, that's the wrong word, but not having access to their own information. So regulators having access to good information is really, really important. And then finally, we've got the people buying houses, but we've also got people buying businesses, and we don't want them essentially not having access to the same level of information. So we have a system called climate valuation for homeowners. Now, that's what we do, but really, whether we do it or someone else does it, it's really important that people on the street, people making decisions about their homes, their families, their businesses, have access to this information, because otherwise you have really dangerous asymmetries, which could mean that they are taking on risks, buying a house that they don't understand those risks, and then in 5 years' time, suddenly it's uninsured, a flood comes along, and they're financially ruined. So my sort of final point here, Namita, would be really it's important that we have all of these key parts of society, whether it's the ordinary mums and dads, whether it's SMEs and small businesses, the banks and the lenders, and the regulators, all seeing the world with a broadly similar perspective, because then there's the ability to collaborate on the solutions. And that's what we all need to get to. We need ourselves, not working for our own interests, but working for the greater interests of our communities and our society and our economy. So on that point, I'll hand back to you. But great that these topics are coming up. And I really think these are the issues of the moment. We're seeing insurance start to collapse in the US. We're seeing big problems in various countries, and it really is time for us to galvanize on this particular problem.
Yeah.
Thank you, Namita.
Thank you, Carl. I think you've made a very important point of this conduit of, bringing together the regulator and the banks and the customers and access to standardized comparable data. I think that's important. And I like your point on the policemen. It's like, cyber crime units in certain parts of, say, India don't have internet access. So how are they going to go behind these cyber crimes? I mean, a different context here, but it's very similar to how regulators need to have this data. In certain markets, they're setting the standards, or they're setting the direction for climate scenario analysis, and they need a lot of information to be able to build this. But thanks, and this is very important. And I think, just to add here is, this is an expensive space from a banker's lens. And therefore, some aid coming from DFIs or from the, some G20 fund that can support this, I think some support needs to be there. It's a great, Mark, Carl, that you're working with, some of the regulators on pro bono basis. But I think we need to also look at the expense here in terms of, how banks would able to withhold that pressure. But let me move on to Hera. Hera, Orbify is using a very unique blend of technologies to create stimulations of climate-related impacts in the real world, tapping into the rapidly growing space of metaverse. So how does the output aid in quantification and pricing of climate risks? Because that is what ultimately, that's the ultimate output that a banker would be, the credit officer, the risk officer would be looking at, right? So I need to know how much of pricing I'm going to levy. So that becomes the base of the discussion. So over to you, Hera, to answer that question.
Thank you. Thank you, Namita. So first of all, I want to thank the entire team that's worked here to bring all this really great webinar together. I mean, so far, I've learned a lot from all of my previous speakers. So I'm just going to extend what, Zakia and Carl have shared a little bit. And I think that for all the participants, this is a great sounding board to ask questions and to keep connected, right? So, and with that, perspective matters, right? And I'm just going to shortly share this just because I think it's important, right? And the perspective in which you approach a problem to arrive at a solution, that always matters. And I just want to share that from our company's perspective, it's always been driven by two things. And for me, it's been driven by two things, which is one, technology, it has to be driven with a purpose, but also two, my perspective as an engineer. I've been in this space of leading and managing decarbonization projects end to end, generation to transmission, distribution. What does it mean for climate resilient infrastructure, right? And again, all of this might sound the furthest away from banking and financial services, but I think in the end, when two worlds that do not typically talk to each other collide, very unique solutions form. And so you talk about metaverse and you talk about digital twins. That's what we do. This is how we approach and solve the problem of managing and actually measuring acute physical climate risk at the very granular level, right? And so this is the genesis of Orbify. It's the collision, I would say, of 3D physics-informed digital twins, right? These are things that have been used in engineering and design for decades. And then the only thing that we're doing new and novel is applying the same type of technology for climate simulations, for banking, for insurance, for, for regulators. So again, I'll just put a little bit of I'm talking about this from a climate tech perspective, but, digital twins, they've been around for a very long time, right? Everyone now hears about NVIDIA and Omniverse and Metaverse and things like that. But what we're doing is just taking digital twins or digital representations of buildings, of structures, of homes across an entire city or an entire geography or an entire portfolio, and then saying, okay, how do we actually derive the important climate KPIs, right? And the why is Namita, as you shared, that's absolutely important. I think everyone at the moment is taking the first steps at developing the methodologies, at quantifying climate risk across assets and loans and mortgage portfolios and things like this. But, from our perspective, we approached it from, hey, you might have a bunch of weather data, you might have information about scenarios, about 1 in 100 year storm events. But that's great. And the question is there a missing link today about the actual damage scenarios and the vectors for damage? And so, yeah, climate risk, it exists in the real world, but I think there are two major interfaces of impact, right? It's going to be on property or it's going to be on people. And if it's on property, it's again, building structures and homes, right? And so then the question is quantifying this risk and pricing climate risk. It's actually a question in most cases of how do I translate all of these different scenarios of flood, of fire, of hurricanes, of, all of these worst case weather events, and how do I actually translate that impact on building structures and homes? And so this is what we do, right? We do it with these 3D city scale digital twins. We apply the same technology and the same physics AI and simulation approaches that are, maybe typically used in the design of skyscrapers or in global climate models used for weather prediction. All we're doing is localizing it to cities and towns and geographies, right? And so with this, I think, it gets to the point of reframing the problem, but it then, to Namita's point, what we're able to do actually helps banks go deeper, right? And accurately price risk with these digital twins, right? And get to things that, people care about, the damage profiles, the climate adjusted probability of default, the loss given default, right? The loss estimations, all of those types of things. But I think if I have my 2 cents at the end, it's always, and I think for even the participants that are joining this call, I think, when you're thinking about these type of solutions, always start with an understanding of the outputs and then work backwards from there, right? And try to connect, I would say, the vectors of damage and the vectors for impact when you are quantifying and pricing climate risks.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very interesting point that you made in terms of, always start with the outputs that you're looking for and, how do you place the risk at the center of it and then use, whatever technological support that one has. And, that also then puts out a question in terms of how do you decide as a financial institution in terms of what are the priorities that you want to start with from a sector standpoint, right? I mean, real estate becomes one of the critical sectors because there's so much of exposure of banks to that kind of sector. But then on the other side, there are hard to abate sectors. And if you look at some of the emerging markets with, EU laws on CBAM, they have to quickly start calculating their, risk matrix in terms of the heavy costs that are going to be levied on account of lack of, cutting down GHG emissions. So I think it's a Pandora's box that I would think, would get opened up, and so much more needs to be discussed on this. But let me move to, from mitigation to adaptation, and I want to bring in Mark here. Mark, the Capitals Coalition came up with the Natural Capital Protocol. I have been personally involved in this whole, natural capital financing. It's very, I'm very passionate about these topics. And a few years ago, you have been, working with stakeholders over the last few years on measuring and valuing natural capital. Now, this is, here we are just about dealing with climate. and TCFD, and these norms are becoming household or bankhold norms where bankers have started to understand this. And now here, this is something called natural capital. So in your experience, what have been some of the barriers to widespread the adoption of natural capital accounting in that sense? And because we are talking about technology here, how do you think that can help to overcome this, given that there is a lack of any kind of regulatory intervention, right? I mean, there is no regulatory mandate to look at these kind of aspects. So how would you respond to that, Mark? Over to you.
Thank you, Namita. And it's wonderful to be here today. And the benefit of being the last speaker here is that I can build off all of the great points that have just been made. I've been writing down lots of notes as we've been going, so thank you. There is, within the community, so we curate a community of around 13,000 organizations around the world that are looking at this question of what is value. So building on what Carl was saying, which I completely agree with, this has got to be to actually help us to do something. And I think a lot of the tech at the moment, we've got lots of people in our community that are developing new nature tech approaches. And a lot of them are developing them because they're really good ideas, but they're not necessarily connected up to what people need. And I think we've got to flip it a little bit. Rather than great technology, what is it we're trying to solve, and then develop the technology to address that? It's valued at about 40 billion at the moment, the market around nature tech. And there's a lot of work going on, but I mean, I think that's still extremely small compared to actually the scale it should be. And that's because we're not connecting it up really to what is needed. So you asked the question about barriers. The biggest barrier, and we do an annual survey of our community, the biggest barrier people have come up with is confidence, actually. It's not now, what do I do? Around how do I apply natural capital or things like that. Those words impact. I mean, I can't walk through the city of London or Frankfurt or anywhere now without actually tripping over a new impact fund this or a new impact bond, or everyone's doing something around it, but there isn't consistency in it and there isn't confidence in it. And I think this is a really important thing that we need to address. And this is linking into your regulation and governance of it. Tech can provide transparency, it can provide accountability, it can provide scaling of solutions. I mean, that's what we're really seeing here. Those are the three key things. If we can't bring in some form of governance to it, then we're going to end up with not having confidence in the information, and then the information becomes unvaluable. We can't use that in what we're doing. So being able to build that governance is really important. We brought together over the last couple of years a value commission, a group of commissioners from the great and the good around the world that work in the markets, financial markets, that work in tech, that are indigenous peoples as well, and trying to bring together a broad group of people that are affected by value. And they have just agreed very recently on a governance framework for the information around value and impact, which we will be releasing later this year. So the governance framework for value will be released later this year in September at the New York Climate Week. We'll send you all invites if you want to come along to the launch. And then there'll be a consultation for 3 months around that period of time. But that governance process will bring in those transparency requirements that are needed. So what information needs to be passed on? A lot of the information we've got at the moment is in black boxes, is hidden away. I see these great numbers and I don't know, and I'm meant to be an expert in this, whether they actually stack up because I can't get down to the base data. So that transparency is really important. Confidence criteria for users will be the second element. And then in the same way that we have financial numbers, and financial numbers are not comparable actually most of the time, it's only when you read the notes that follow them that they start to make sense. You know which method they've been using, accounting method, etc. We're writing the notes at the moment for these impacts and dependencies. So all of this has significant implications for the tech world. The tech world will have to be able to use this governance process. Now, one question I was asked yesterday is there one body that actually should be regulating this globally? Well, unfortunately, there isn't. And I think that one of the things we're trying to do at the moment is bring together several of the IOSCOs, the COSOs from an internal management process, all of those OZOs that are out there. There's lots of different organizations. There's one in insurance sector as well. Bring those together to look, because there's got to be, as Carl was saying, there's got to be a connection between these. They've got to have a similar understanding of what they mean by the governance and by value, and that isn't there. Just one last thing I just wanted to mention, digitalization. digitalization of data is extremely important here. We've got the opportunity with broader sustainability data around climate, nature, and by the way, people is the next one that's coming. So just be aware, there's a TCFD, there's a TNFD, nature-related financial disclosures. The TISFD, inequality and social, is being set up now. So we are looking at more areas where this is going to go. And it's the connections between them is the exciting bit. That's where innovation is happening. It's not in any individual sector. It's how they interact is the exciting bit. But the digitalization of sustainability data is really, really key here. We've been hosting a project for the last couple of years on that as well, working with the EU Commission, but also working with the ISSB and various other bodies, looking at how we can get ahead of the digitalization of data. No one's going to read it through reports anymore. I've got loads of reports behind me. You can't see, I've got a screen on here, but I've got loads of reports that I've been involved in writing. We're not going to be accessing information like that. So actually digitalizing this and the taxonomies we use is going to be essential to get the information to the people that need it. And we've got an opportunity with sustainability data to get ahead of that as the regulations and things are coming in to make sure we put that in place.
Great. I think that was extremely useful. And you just mentioned about the world collaboration that's happening on this front. And I fully agree with you that digitalization of data and people, I think that's very critical, given that there are trillions of dollars that are at risk when you look at it from that sense, in terms of the climate, negative incidences that we are seeing across. But that's I think good, and it would be also very important to know more about the TISFD. But I'll come to you. I'll circle back to you shortly. Let me go to Zakia. Zakia, most of the speakers here spoke about deepening of integration of climate risks, transition into overall strategy, governance, product development of financial institutions. And then there is on the other side, the tech that comes from a climate standpoint. Now, some of the innovative fintech solutions that have been around. We've seen how fintech has enabled the banking sector in a way, or at a point where it also threatened the banking sector, right? I mean, one of the biggest competitors for the banking sector was fintech. So how do you see leveraging fintech at the same time, or leveraging innovative fintech solutions to engage better with the SME clients? And this is particularly when you look at climate action. So how would you respond to that? Over to you, Zakia.
Thank you, Ms. Namitas. Based on my experience and observation, there are a few innovative fintech solutions available in the market. They are helping the banks to better engage with the SME clients on climate action. The solution is in the form of a digital platform which able to track, collect, analyze, and translate clients' climate data into climate risk ratings. Thereafter, provide a final report and recommendations and necessary actions to be taken to reduce their carbon footprints. The report is useful to the banks, facilitating the bankers to develop the right terms and conditions for green and transition financing package as required by the state client. Post disbursement wise, when the financing is approved, then we disperse the facility. The platform is able to track the performance of clients' climate transition based on data submitted from time to time. This will also enable the banks to innovate and offer more sustainability-linked financing program, hence narrowing the financing gaps. The platform also able to benchmark clients' carbon accounting with the available industry data. Having said that, Anamitas, in the future, we may want to have a one-stop digital platform whereby it connects the SMEs and the banks. SMEs will be able to derive the climate rating based on the information provided, and thereafter, the platform able to direct the SMEs to the suitable financing solutions available on the platform. I think this will be a wish list of the banks and the SMEs out there, where we could it could be also good, a great business opportunity for the fintech companies. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. No, I think a one-stop shop from a digital solution standpoint is very, very important because when we look at the context of financing, and I sit on the board of one non-banking financial company, Affordable Housing, where they have a solution where the borrowers. Credit can get approved within 5 minutes of answering some 10 questions. And they have done borrower profiling in a way where the last mile access to credit is responded to through technology, speed, and the costs, because when technology is deployed, obviously the cost of the manpower goes down, and that benefits the end user. But that's great. I think I want to come back to Carl. Carl, just going back to real estate, which is at risk from physical and transition challenges that we see as far as climate is concerned. And this is going to potentially impact the asset value in the future. And you said it yourself, the gestation period of these asset, the exposures is quite lengthy. How does the risk profile of, say, a real estate property address? So the location, the cascading would have kind of cascading effect on the climate change impact. And does climate resilience rating consider the grade of the structures, such as certified green buildings? How is that calculated? I mean, how would a banker really look at using this kind of information and technology? Over to you, Carl.
Yeah, look, really great question, because, I think something you've raised in what you've said is this interface between the decision that the bank is having to make, or the lender, and the position of the person who's right. You talked about, low-income housing. Now, really, that's where adaptation happens. It's every decision you make, which is ill-informed, is potentially maladaptive. You've got 30 years of a headache. Yeah. So if you can intercept that decision with the right information and make an informed decision, then we're in a much stronger position, both you and the customer, the bank and the customer. So I put a link in the chat, interestingly. The climate valuation is quite interesting because, quite frankly, we don't make any money from it. It's a service to customers, but it's part of our mission to try and level the playing field. But where it started to get pickup is where the banks, where we've seen stress testing of the banks, they've been saying, well, let's look at our mortgage portfolio. But then the next question they ask is, well, what am I going to do about that? And so we say, well, you need to intercept the decision at the point where you're writing the mortgage. So you've got to have something fast. You've got to have something where someone sits in, and as you said, 5-10 questions. When was the house built? Where is it? What kind of materials is it made from, for example? How high is it off the ground? That's going to tell you whether it's at flood risk or not. So these are really important. A handful of small answers can make a big difference onto whether you think that property is going to be resilient or not. So in a way, it feels like if we can get that interface right, we can firstly avoid, let's say, decisions we might regret. But then, of course, we're also in a position where we can make some adaptive decisions. And some exciting work that we're involved in with a couple of banks is to say, okay, so someone's walked in, they've sat down, you've said, I'm sorry, Namita, this property is in a flood zone, or it's a little bit older, and we really are not very comfortable lending. And quite frankly, Namita, we don't actually think you should buy this. However, looking at the data, we think this could be adapted. You could put a flood wall around this with a floodgate. That would probably solve most of the problems, and then we would be much happier. So how about this? How about we'll give you the mortgage. We'll also give you an extra X $1,000 to put appropriate flood protection around that property. And then A, you're going to have a safe house. B, we're going to not worry that our property is going to devalue. You should have no problem getting insurance, and your property will probably go up in value as a result of this intervention. Okay, so everybody's happy, the insurer, the bank, you, the customer, and even our community is that bit more resilient. Now, if each time one of these transactions happens, we're making an adaptive intervention, then we're in a position where gradually, incrementally, we're making our communities more resilient. So this is really where I think getting that right, but you know, as Zaki has pointed out, you know, getting these decisions at the point where they're made is very, very important. We can't just do this offline. It's got to be fast and it's got to be integrated into the workflow that these businesses or the banks make. And look, the parallels with green building. I mean, what we're seeing with green building, if you like, is you know, these are really where you intervene at the point of construction and so on. And obviously we can do a lot there, but we do have to acknowledge that we've got a lot of assets that were built before we really understood climate change, before we had the kind of precision of data that, for example, Hara's talking about. And so what we need to do now is not just kind of go, oh, well, we're not going to do anything. These are real people with real families and real financial worries. We've got to come up with solutions for them that make that essentially improve the situation for everybody. So that's really where I think the exciting point of technology can be, is if we can get it to the speeds and accuracy that we can make precision decisions in real time. Very exciting.
Yeah, no, I think you've made a very interesting point, and if I may just flip what you just said is, you know, when we looked at financial literacy or financial inclusion as a part of a banking service, what banks I have seen and I have done myself is also work with the borrowers on the habits of borrowing, because you don't want them to take extra credit lines and then misuse those, you know. So I think in a way what you're saying is that banks need to start with providing cohesive solutions, where they're just not talking about providing that loan or a credit line, but it is about also working with the borrower and educating the borrower, plus giving options of what otherwise they could do. So I think that's a very interesting point that you have made, similar to what car dealerships do, right? I mean, they don't just sell cars, they provide you with registration support and tax support and loans and all kinds of things, right? Bunched together. So I think that's where we need to.
Yeah, and Namita, I think just building on your point that you made earlier, which is what is the role, for example, for financing? If we know that there's this gap around adaptation, which is that we might have a borrower who can afford the house but can't afford the adaptation measure, this is really a great opportunity for things like adaptation grants, where governments could work with the banks in order to provide a vehicle for those grants to go to the right places. And where you'll do that. So this could also be an opportunity where we see a sort of public-private partnership in terms of community resilience building. And I think you made that point really well earlier. And I do think it applies in this case as well.
Yes. I think Edwin, we should make a representation to Edwin so that EU can provide some funding to certain countries, emerging markets maybe. But let me move to Hara. Hara, it is well known that estimating impacts of climate change is all this evolving science with widely varying results depending upon, say, scenarios that are used in climate modeling and the outputs that come out of it, right? So I would like you to just talk very quickly on what are some of the challenges in accurately estimating the cost of impacts of weather-related events. I mean, how can it inform decision-making for bankers? Over to you, Hara.
Yeah, so when it comes to these challenges, I think, almost everyone has discussed this at some point from this panel. It's the data, right? And it's important to take a look at even some of the lessons learned that many are already seeing, and when it comes to adopting solutions, so you can build in the right way, right? And I think a former panelist also discussed that we need to think about, we shouldn't be just the adoption of any technology solution, but really, a solution that actually gets to the core of the end result that you're looking for. And so recently, I think all participants that took part in the Bank of England's climate stress stress test were polled, they were surveyed, and I think some of the results that I remember were over 70% of these, federally regulated financial institutions said that modeling of these acute physical climate risk events was their biggest challenge. And I think, 3/4 said that they relied on additional third-party data sources. They had to, investigate different ways and models to complete the exercise. And I think greater than 70% said they specifically needed support in terms of modeling and having that right data. So it comes back to the challenges in accurately estimating the cost and impact of these weather events. It comes down to data and the models, right? So and I think like my advice of how this can inform decision making is that the weather data itself, of course, it's becoming more granular and you can develop very localized types of scenarios, but is that going to actually get you to the cost of the impact? I think the cost of the impact is going to be within the model itself. And if within the model itself, you don't actually capture, climate to the actual climate to damage interface and the vectors for damage, then how do you accurately understand what's going on, right? And I'm informed when talking to different contacts and central banks in different regions and banks in different areas. And I think the best approach, and again, it doesn't matter what a technology that is being adopted is to start small and start to develop from there, right? Data has limitations, even in the context of what we're doing in terms of 3D digital twin models, right? Because it could be that the information is limited in a specific area, but I think with everything, it's in a nascent stage, and the only way to do is to start to develop a methodology and to start small, dig deep into the data and the potential vectors for damage, and it's only then you're going to get a true sense of and a cost of that climate, right? So,
yeah, I think you've made a very valid point in terms of how do you take a localized approach, if I may say, like a global support in terms of the direction, the methodology, and then build on local scenarios. I think that's very, very useful. Having said that, I think the desire of a banker, because climate is a very complex subject, is to give me straight outputs in terms of on account of this particular climate risk, what should be my what basis points should I charge in terms of my climate risk kind of a pricing, and what should be the tenors that I take into account, and how do I get my financed emissions data. I think that would be really useful. But I agree that the space is evolving, and you have to start small and then grow big. Let me go to Mark for the last question. And Mark, as financial institutions seek to better understand and manage nature-related, financial risks and dependencies, how do you think they can leverage geospatial data, remote sensing, IoT technologies? I mean, all this, upcoming themes that are there to gain deeper visibility into natural capital impacts of the borrowers. And this is across, say, high impact sectors. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you. It sounds to me, reading the notes here and the people's chat, that there's an awful lot of experience on this call about how to do this. So I'm not going to tell people, I think we should be working as a community here. And I think what you've done today is bring together a lot of people with a lot of expertise. It's a lot about sharing those ideas, and platforms like this therefore are essential. There is actually a Nature Tech Expo today, actually, in the UK on this, in Leeds. There's lots of other initiatives underway. I would definitely recommend you look at the Nature Tech Collective, which was previously the MRV Collective, which brings together a lot of these bodies once again in a collaborative way of working. And Nature for Climate has really been leading some of the reviews and analysis behind what's going on here. So the 78% of the investment at the moment is coming through the US, which means there's a massive opportunity in India and in Asia at the moment for further growth there that isn't being seen. So I think that there's different markets that are evolving. Most of the work is around agriculture and food. some of it then around data and management, but most of the investment is going into food and agriculture as well at the moment. So a lot of the satellite data, a lot of the other data is being used for that. There's a couple of new things. The TNFD, the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures we talked about, is setting up a data facility, which is once again bringing together around 100 of the nature tech different organizations. That is underway and in development. So definitely keep an eye out for that. I think that will be very interesting. And you'll see some of the leading organizations coming out through that process. And there's some really good organizations out there that are leading the way. GIST Impact is doing some great work on trying to connect up the technology through with the actual natural capital work. You've got Nature Base, you've got Nature Metrics. I can't name them all, and if I start naming one, I'm going to get into trouble for not naming them all. But do think about that. I'm also moderating a day of events on this on Wednesday this week, which I've just realized is tomorrow, around nature tech as well. So there's a group meeting around the London Climate Week about that as well. So for those of you that are in London, there will be more events this week. And for me, the interesting thing is we started talking about what is, how do you make better decisions, very much what Carl is talking about, how do you get that information to make better decisions? And now technology is becoming a key part of those solutions and provision of it. So I think find those places like the webinar today where you can connect with people is the best way of finding it, because at the moment it is a very early setup. There's lots of new entrants in the space. As soon as you find one, there'll be another one coming along afterwards. So coming back to what Hara was saying about that link into what is it, what do you need? Work out what that is first. What is the question you're trying to answer? And then try and find the tech that's going to provide that solution, rather than just going after the nicest new piece of tech that's out there, because there's lots of lovely tech to play with.
Yeah, thanks. I think, what comes to my mind is socializing these concepts even within financial institutions, and what is the kind of what is the kind of movement on this front to various initiatives. I think even one gets exposure to all of that, and in fact you've given me an idea for the next webinar. Maybe we should focus on natural capital and natural capital assessments for banks, but those were very, very good inputs. The panelists on the side have been very active, so most of the questions have been answered, and I know that we've overshot the time that was allocated to us, but this was an absolutely interesting discussion. I think there's a big learning. Climate is indeed a very complex kind of a subject, and all of us are grappling with what needs to be done. With that, I think we will come to the closure of this session, and we will put out the details of all the panelists, and you could reach out to them for your individual queries. But let me thank each of you, Mark, Hara, Carl, and Zakia, for being here today, so eloquently sharing your experiences and your inputs. And thank you very much, and we'll continue these discussions. With that, and thank you very much, Edwin, for making the time for your special speech plus staying on. I think that is very important, and I'm sure you've taken some inputs for the EU to look at from the capital that we require to put these things together, and the support that banks may be able to, especially those in the emerging markets, who would like to dig into some kind of technical assistance to institutionalize these technologies within their institutions. And thank you very much. So over to you, Ritu, with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Namita, and all the panelists for your enthusiastic participation. I do believe that most of the questions have been addressed in the chat box. With that, I think we will close up the webinar. For any queries that the participants may have, please write to us and we will try our best to get back to you. I hope you all enjoyed the session as much as we enjoyed hosting it. And thank you very much for joining us today, and have a nice rest of the day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.